Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Israel releasing first-person footage from the Tuesday morning raid in which wanted terrorist Ibrahim Al-Nablusi was killed. Meantime, Facebook Meta's latest chatbot AI adopting a love of ice cream as well as some disturbingly anti-Semitic undertones. And finally, do you know what's in your tap? Or more accurately, what's missing from it? A troubling report on the hidden dangers of desalinated water. A day after killing wanted terrorist Ibrahim Al-Nablusi, Israel releasing rare helmet cam footage from the early morning raid in which he was killed. In a tense sequence released for publication by the IDF, the compilation of helmet cam footage showing soldiers running through narrow alleys and blasting out positions from which to return fire using a number of different tools. This is the IDF's Tuesday morning raid in Nablus, the IDF intending to arrest Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigade's commander Ibrahim Al-Nablusi. Nablusi, a months-long wanted terror suspect, is believed to have participated in several shooting attacks against Israeli soldiers and civilians, but Nablusi and other militants refusing calls to surrender and opening fire on the IDF, while Palestinians outside began rioting. The IDF responding then with live fire and crowd dispersal methods, as well as eventually 2 anti-tank missiles fired into the building where Nablusi and another shooter were barricaded. As for IDF casualties, only the Yamam unit's service dog, Zili, is named. Zili was sent to confirm Nablusi's death when he was fatally shot by other terrorists nearby. Meantime, with respect to other terror groups, Israeli pressure on Palestinian Islamic Jihad not letting up. Defense Minister Gantz saying the terror group's remaining leaders, as well as all of the heads of the terror organizations, should be worried, adding that Israel will use its might as needed and that none of them have any guarantees for their lives. Then Wednesday, Israel arresting yet another senior Islamic Jihad official at the so-called container checkpoint in East Bethlehem, and all this within days of the ceasefire that ended Israel's Operation Breaking Dawn, in which nearly all of Islamic Jihad's leadership was either arrested or killed. Moving on, various Knesset parties now rearranging their ranks ahead of the 5th serial national elections in Israel this November. ILTV's Kayla Eberlin with some of the results.
זה יום חג למדינת ישראל, משום שזה יום חג לליכוד, והליכוד זה השדרה המרכזית של המחנה הלאומי, מוביל וצריך להוביל את מדינת ישראל, להחזיר לה את היציבות, להחזיר לה את הגאווה הלאומית, לתקן את הכלכלה וכל שאר הדברים שרק ממשלה יציבה יכולה לעשות. The
Israeli Likud party finally holding its primaries Wednesday ahead of the national elections in November, and 140,000 eligible Likud members will be casting their votes across 110 polling stations. But the voting not for the party chairman position, which Knesset opposition leader and former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will retain. Voters will choose from some 110 candidates for the Knesset slate list and regional district positions. This, as early national polls estimate that Likud will take around 35 seats in the upcoming Knesset. Meanwhile, in the Labour Party primaries on Tuesday, the top 5 spots behind the party leader, Merav Michali, taken by newer, younger faces. A turnover that surprised many, as veterans like Public Security Minister Omer Balev and Diaspora Affairs Minister Nachman Shai pushed to 9th and 17th respectively. And this means that neither Shai nor Balev are likely to make it into the next Knesset at all. Likud expected to avoid such swaps though, thanks in part to Netanyahu's personal request from primaries voters.
כשתבואו להצביע בפריימריז, שימו לב שיש שם פתק נוסף. זו בקשה אישית שלי מכם, בקשה שקיבלה את גיבוי מזכירות הליכוד, לאפשר לי לשריין כמה אנשים ברשימת הליכוד המצוינת שנבחר. האנשים הללו שאני אביא, ייתנו תוספת כוח אדירה ויסייעו לנו להשיג את הניצחון.
Now, the Russian war against Ukraine is still raging on with no end in sight, as millions have been displaced by the fighting, some with nowhere to go. But one site in Hungary has become a makeshift shelter for hundreds of Jews fleeing the war. And joining us now with more on this special sanctuary and on the Jewish community of Ukraine is Rabbi Meir Stumbler, head of the Federation of Jewish Communities of Ukraine. Thank you so much for joining us, Rabbi.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so first of all, I understand that you've been traveling back and forth between the Ukraine and Hungary, risking your life in the middle. How have the last few months been for you since the war began?
Well, you know, it's hard for me even to talk about it. It's hard for me to think about it, but it's really ridiculous. It's crazy. It's something that I don't even believe that this is happening. Once I used to sit on a plane from my city where I live in Dnipro, and in 3 hours I was in Tel Aviv. Now it takes like two days. So it's really unbelievable. It's very tough. My family are in Israel now, and I'm kind of back and forth trying to help the people that we helped evacuate, make sure they have where to stay, which this is actually where I am now in Hungary at the Balaton.
So what can you tell us about this refugee or this refuge in Hungary that I understand was been dubbed the Machane Chabad?
Well, this is very interesting. Rabbi Kovesh, the chief rabbi of Emich, which is the Federation of Jewish Communities of Hungary, called me just 2 days after the war broke out, and he asked me if there's anything he can help. And I told him I need a place for 1,000 people because we had many refugees that we helped leave the country, escape, but they didn't want to move to Israel. They didn't want to move anywhere else. They wanted to just wait until the war is over and come back to Ukraine. So we had to make sure and somehow get a place for them to stay. And they're used to having a nice, warm community, Jewish community, takes care of everything they need. I called Rabbi Kovesh, and a week later he got back to me, and he told me that this beautiful resort that the government owns, that they will be happy to give it to us for a while. We didn't think it was going to be so long, but thank God we're here and we established Jewish life over here. We have over 2,500 refugees that went through this place. Some are here from the beginning. Some found themselves jobs. Some moved to Israel and to other places.
Well, I know also that there are children, families. Can you share with us a little bit about the refugees that are living there?
There are some families that came out of Kharkiv that their houses were bombed. They have nowhere to return to. Some that came from Mariupol, which the city almost doesn't exist anymore. Some came, we have a family from Berdyansk, which there was occupied as soon as they started the war. And some are even from different cities that they just can't stand it 15 or 20 times a day, looking for a bomb shelter and living in such a situation. So they just wanted to come down and live here. Besides that, there are some families that choose to stay in Ukraine, but now for the summer, they wanted to rest for a while. So they came out for a few weeks for a vacation. There are some children that came alone and their families are still back in Ukraine for a summer camp. There's different, different groups.
Well, this camp, this initiative, it sounds like a very costly operation. Will it be able to be maintained for much longer?
Wow, that's a very, very good question. And let me tell you, in the beginning of the war, it was pretty easy to raise funds in the States and in other countries. And even, there were wealthy people, very wealthy Jews in Ukraine itself. But now, even though the war is going on, and actually it's getting worse, but the world doesn't talk about it anymore. So when you meet someone in the States, he says, I thought the war is over. Well, it's not over. It's getting much worse from day to day. So what we're trying to do now is trying to help them move on with their life. Okay, we have people that are here for a half a year already. We say, choose where you want to move. We're going to help you move to any community. The Hungarian communities in Budapest are trying to find jobs for the people in Debrecen, or of course, choose Israel. We have a nice community built in Bat Yam that we have 30 families that are established over there. In Nofa Galil, we have communities that are being established, and the different places over here in Germany as well.
All right, and what can you tell us about the once thriving Jewish communities in Ukraine? What's left of them?